Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Yet here you are, replaying every conversation, analyzing every text, wondering where it all went wrong. Here's the truth that will sting before it heals. You didn't lose her because you stopped trying. You lost her the moment you tried too hard. When love became performance, when your peace transformed into pursuit, when every gesture carried the silent plea, "Am I enough now?" Attraction didn't fade by accident. It suffocated under the weight of your need. The paradox. The moment you stop needing to be chosen, you become magnetic again. Today, we'll decode precisely how caring too much repels the very connection you're desperate to secure. And more importantly, how to restore the calm power that makes you worthy of being chosen without ever begging for it. 1. When love turns into pressure. There's a quiet poison that seeps into love when we stop offering it freely and start wielding it as currency. You've felt it, haven't you? That shift from genuine affection to something heavier, where every text, every gesture, every "I was thinking of you" carries an invisible price tag. Did she notice? Will she reciprocate? Am I enough now? This is where love dies. Not in the absence of care, but in the suffocating presence of too much of it, wrapped in expectation. The Stoics understood what we often forget, that attachment itself isn't the enemy. It's the fear beneath the attachment that corrodes everything it touches. When you give from a place of panic, when your kindness becomes a contract she never signed, you've transformed affection into a burden she must carry. And no woman, no person stays long under the weight of unspoken demands. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Yet we do the opposite. We hand our peace to another person and wait breathless for them to validate our worth. Every unanswered message becomes evidence of our inadequacy. Every moment of her distance feels like abandonment. But here's the truth that will set you free. Her response was never meant to complete you. Consider the law of polarity that governs all attraction. Masculine and feminine energies thrive on tension, on the dance between presence and space, between depth and mystery. But when you collapse into her orbit, when your entire emotional weather depends on her sunshine, that polarity flatlines. Predictability replaces magnetism. Safety replaces desire. She doesn't pull away because she's cruel. She pulls away because she can no longer feel you, as separate from her as solid ground beneath her feet. The ancient Stoics practiced a discipline. We've forgotten amor fati, the love of fate, the acceptance of what is without the desperate grasping for what we want it to be. When you care for someone from this place, deeply, fully, but without the trembling need for reciprocation, your love becomes unshakable. It becomes attractive precisely because it asks for nothing. Try this practice, simple yet transformative. Give for one full day, without keeping score. Send that message, offer that kindness, express that appreciation. Then let it dissolve into the air like morning mist. Don't refresh your phone. Don't construct narratives about her silence. Don't turn your generosity into a loan requiring interest. Just give then return to your center. Notice what happens in that space. Notice how your chest loosens, how peace returns like an old friend you'd forgotten. This is the paradox. The moment you release your grip, you become most worthy of being held. As Epictetus reminds us, he is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. Apply this to love. Rejoice in your capacity to care without demanding that care be mirrored back to you in equal measure. Care deeply, yes, but never from panic, never from the desperate mathematics of reciprocity. That is how you keep your power, and paradoxically, how you become most magnetic. 2. She felt it before you spoke. Women possess an ancient radar that men often underestimate, an intuitive ability to read the invisible currents beneath your words. Before your mouth formed that carefully crafted sentence, before you hit send on that perfectly timed message, she already knew. She felt the tremor in your energy, the subtle desperation leaking through your composure, like water through cracked stone. You think you hid it well. Your words were casual, your tone light. But energy doesn't lie, and what she sensed wasn't confidence. It was a quiet plea. Please reassure me. Tell me I matter. Confirm that I'm enough. The Stoics taught that we betray ourselves not through our actions, but through the quality of presence we bring to each moment. Seneca observed, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Yet when we approach love as a trial, we must pass, rather than a space we inhabit with calm certainty. We've already failed the test. Here's what happens in that instant of recognition. She feels your need before you express it, and something fundamental shifts. The polarity that drew her to you, your groundedness, your self-possession, your ability to exist fully without her validation, begins to collapse. You've handed her the responsibility for your emotional equilibrium, and instinctively she steps back, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. This is the mirroring principle that governs all intimate dynamics. Her distance isn't random or punitive. It's a reflection of your internal chase. When you pursue validation internally, frantically scanning her responses for proof of your worth, she feels that pursuit even when you're sitting still. The external calm you project cannot mask the internal storm, and she responds to what's true beneath the surface. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself and your way of thinking. When you root your happiness outside yourself, when her attention becomes the sun around which you orbit, you violated the first principle of masculine power, self-sufficiency. And she feels that violation like a shift in atmospheric pressure. Emotional leadership. The quality that makes a man magnetic resides in this capacity to remain unmoved by the fluctuations of external response. Not cold, not detached, but centered. A tree doesn't anxiously await acknowledgement from the birds that rest in its branches. It simply stands, and by standing, becomes shelter. When you text from desperation, rather than genuine expression, you're not connecting, you're grasping. And grasping repels. It transforms conversation into transaction, presence into performance. She doesn't want your strategies or your carefully calculated timing. She wants the version of you who exists fully, whether she responds or not. The practice here is ruthlessly simple. Before you reach out, stop. Breathe. Not the shallow breath of anxiety, but the deep breath of a man who remembers himself. Breathe until the desperate edge softens. Breathe until you return to neutral, not indifferent, but unattached to outcome. Breathe until you can send that message or not send it with equal peace. Epictetus taught his students, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Apply this to your interactions. Master the impulse. Master the need. Master the fear that whispers you'll be forgotten if you're not constantly visible. Stillness speaks louder than strategy. Your composed presence will always communicate more powerfully than your anxious words. She's listening not to what you say, but to who you are beneath what you say. Return to your center. She'll feel that too. 3. The trap of being the good guy. There's a particular species of kindness that isn't kind at all. It's a transaction dressed in virtue's clothing. You've worn this mask, perhaps, without knowing it. The helpful gesture offered with a hidden invoice. The listening ear that secretly keeps score. The generosity that whispers, "Now do you see my worth? Now will you choose me?" This is the trap of the self-proclaimed good guy. Kindness, weaponized as a tool for approval. Goodness, performed as a plea for validation. And beneath the surface of every unrequited nice gesture lies a quiet resentment, the bitter seed of manipulation we refuse to name. Marcus Aurelius cut through this self-deception with surgical precision. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Notice the distinction be not appear, not perform for an audience, not collect witnesses to your virtue. Simply embody it, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. But we learned differently, didn't we? Somewhere in childhood's formative years, we discovered that pleasing others earned us scraps of attention, that compliance brought temporary safety, that becoming what others needed made us less likely to be abandoned. So we built an identity around being agreeable, accommodating nice, and mistook this survival strategy for love itself. This is the childhood imprint that haunts adult relationships, the belief that your value must be earned through service, that affection is payment for good behavior, that if you're just helpful enough, attentive enough, selfless enough, she'll have no choice but to love you back. But love extracted through obligation isn't love at all. It's hostage-taking with flowers and compliments. The cruel irony. The more you give from this place of hidden need, the less valuable your gifts become. When your kindness requires applause, it ceases to be kindness. It becomes a contract. She never signed a debt she never agreed to carry. And women, with their acute sensitivity to inauthenticity, feel this immediately. They sense the invisible strings attached to your generosity, and they pull away from the puppet show. Seneca understood that true virtue carries its own reward. The wise man does not consider himself undeserving of any of the gifts of fortune, but he does not love them. Apply this wisdom to your actions. Do good because it aligns with who you are, not because it might win you something. The moment you need recognition for your goodness, you've revealed it was never about goodness at all. It was about you. Masculine. power. The kind that actually attracts, rather than repels, emerges when you stop seeking permission to exist, when your peace no longer depends on her noticing your sacrifices. When you do right, simply because you've chosen the kind of man you'll be, regardless of who's watching or rewarding. This week, practice the art of anonymous virtue. Do something genuinely kind that no one will see, that cannot possibly earn you credit or admiration. Help without being asked. Give without leaving your signature. Fix something broken without announcing the repair. Let your goodness be its own reward, witnessed only by the person you see in the mirror. Epictetus taught, know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly. Know yourself as someone whose integrity doesn't require an audience. Adorn yourself with the quiet strength of purposeful action, rather than the desperate ornaments of approval-seeking. The paradox will reveal itself the moment you stop performing goodness for validation. You become genuinely good. And genuine goodness, rooted in strength rather than need, offered freely rather than traded, is magnetic in ways that calculated niceness can never be. Do right. Don't announce it. Your character isn't a performance, it's your foundation. Build it in silence and let others discover it naturally or not at all. 4. Why her warmth turns cold. You've felt the shift, haven't you? That inexplicable cooling, like sunlight retreating behind clouds you can't see. Yesterday, she was warm, engaged, present. Today, there's distance in her eyes, hesitation in her responses. You search your memory for the mistake, replaying conversations, analyzing texts. But here's what you miss. She didn't pull away because of something you said. She pulled away because of something she felt your need for her became too heavy to carry. The feminine spirit possesses an instinct older than language itself. It reads dependency the way a compass reads north instantly, unerringly. And when a woman senses that a man's emotional stability hinges on her presence, her attention, her validation, something primal activates within her. Not contempt, not judgment, but a protective retreat. She withdraws, not to hurt you, but because she cannot carry the weight of two people's emotional worlds. Marcus Aurelius observed, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Yet when you surrender that power to her moods, her availability, her affection, you've violated the fundamental principle of self-mastery. You've made her responsible for your inner weather, and that responsibility transforms desire into something else entirely, sympathy, perhaps, or maternal concern, neither of which sustains romantic attraction. Understand this, she's testing you, though not consciously or maliciously. Every time she creates distance, every moment of coolness, every delayed response asks the same ancient question: can he hold himself without me? This isn't cruelty, it's calibration. She's determining whether you're a man who possesses his own center of gravity, or whether you orbit around hers, pulled by the gravitational force of neediness. The man who collapses when she steps back has failed this test before it began. The man who remains steady, who continues building his life with the same focus, whether she's close or distant, he passes without even knowing he was being evaluated. Because his steadiness wasn't performance, it was nature. Epictetus taught his students a liberating truth. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Her withdrawal is not the problem. Your panic in response to her withdrawal is. The moment you chase her, retreating warmth with desperate texts, with probing questions, with the energy of, "What did I do wrong? How can I fix this?" You've confirmed her deepest fear. You cannot hold yourself. A man admired is a man unshaken, not unfeeling, not cold, but rooted, like an oak that remains standing through seasons of storm and drought alike, providing shade when the sun returns, but never begging the clouds to part. The tree doesn't collapse when birds fly away. It simply stands, and by standing, remains worthy of their return. She's not punishing you when she grows distant. She's responding to the quality of energy you emanate. When your peace depends on her proximity, when your mood mirrors her availability, when your entire emotional ecosystem requires her presence to function. You've become an extension of her rather than a complement to her. And extensions aren't attractive, they're exhausting. The practice here demands courage. When she pulls away, resist every instinct to pursue. Instead, expand. Turn your attention to the friends you've neglected, the mission you've abandoned, the stillness you've forgotten. Not as strategy to win her back, but as reclamation of the self you surrendered. Pour your energy into your purpose. Strengthen your body. Deepen your mind. Cultivate your peace. Let her absence reveal not emptiness, but fullness. Let her distance remind you that you are whole, complete, capable of joy and purpose, independent of her participation in your life. When you stop bending to every shift in her attention, when you stand firm in your own worth, regardless of her warmth or coolness, something shifts. She feels it before you speak. And often, not always, but often the warmth returns. Not because you manipulated it, but because you remembered who you were before you forgot yourself in her. 5. When being open becomes too much. We've been sold a dangerous half-truth that vulnerability equals strength, that emotional transparency builds intimacy, that sharing everything you feel demonstrates courage. And while vulnerability can indeed be powerful, there's a line we often cross where openness becomes collapse, where sharing becomes dumping, where honesty transforms into emotional chaos that repels rather than connects. You've done it, haven't you? Unloaded your anxieties, your fears, your insecurities in a torrent of confession, believing this rawness would draw her closer. Instead, you watched something shift in her eyes. Not compassion exactly, but a subtle withdrawal, a recalibration of how she sees you. Because what you offered wasn't vulnerability anchored in strength. It was turbulence without a captain at the helm. The Stoics understood a truth. Modern culture has forgotten. Feeling deeply and expressing indiscriminately are not the same thing. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Yet we compound that suffering by broadcasting every tremor of our internal landscape, mistaking exposure for authenticity. Here's the distinction that changes everything. Women want access to your depth, not the collapse inside it. They're drawn to the man who feels profoundly, but maintains composure, who experiences the full spectrum of human emotion, yet possesses the discipline to process before expressing. This isn't suppression. It's containment. It's the difference between a river that nourishes the land and a flood that destroys it. When you overshare, when you detail every doubt, catalog every worry, narrate every emotional fluctuation, as it happens, you're not demonstrating openness. You're signaling that you've lost control of your inner world, that the container has cracked, that there's no solid ground beneath the chaos, no captain steering through the storm. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, faced unimaginable pressures, yet maintained, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." He felt everything: grief, frustration, fear, anger, but he chose what to express and when. His meditations weren't written for an audience. They were private reflections, the careful processing of a man who understood that wisdom lies not in feeling everything, but in mastering how we respond to what we feel. Emotional maturity isn't about feeling less. It's about the space between feeling and speaking. It's the pause where you meet your emotion, acknowledge it, sit with it, and then only then decide what, if anything, deserves voice. This gap between stimulus and response is where your power lives. Consider this: every time you rush to explain your feelings, to justify your reactions, to verbalize your internal state, before you've fully understood it yourself, you're asking her to do the work you haven't done. You're making her the container for emotions you haven't yet contained. And that's not intimacy. It's dependence, wearing vulnerability's mask. Epictetus taught, first learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak. Apply this to emotional expression. First understand what you feel and why. First find your ground again. First return to center. Then, and only then, share what remains true after the storm has passed. The practice requires discipline. When emotion rises, pause. Before you text that explanation, that apology, that detailed account of your internal turmoil, stop. Breathe. Sit with the feeling until it loses its urgency. Let silence carry part of your truth. Not every feeling requires articulation. Not every thought deserves an audience. Some truths are meant to be processed alone in the quiet crucible of self-reflection. Honesty isn't about saying everything. It's about saying what matters from a place of composure rather than compulsion. It's choosing words that illuminate rather than overwhelm, that invite understanding rather than demand emotional labor. She doesn't need to know every fluctuation of your mood. She needs to know you can feel deeply without being consumed, that you possess depths she can explore, not an abyss she must rescue you from. Speak only when calm enough to mean it. Let your vulnerability be selective, intentional, grounded. That's when it becomes magnetic, when she senses there's more beneath the surface depths you control, rather than depths that control you. Strength isn't the absence of feeling. It's sovereignty over how and when those feelings find expression. 6. Caring without collapsing. There exists a paradoxical art that few men master: the ability to care deeply while remaining fundamentally unshaken, to invest fully in someone's well-being without making their response the measure of your peace, to offer your presence generously while maintaining the sovereignty of your inner world. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but freedom from being controlled by external circumstances. In modern terms, we might call it magnetic indifference. I care, but I'm not controlled. This is the alchemy that transforms neediness into attraction, desperation into desire. It operates on a simple but profound principle. When you can hold genuine affection for someone without collapsing into their orbit, without requiring their validation to justify your investment, you become magnetic. Not through manipulation or strategy, but through the natural law that governs all attraction. People are drawn to those who are complete without them. 3 pillars support this architecture of self-possessed care, each essential, each requiring daily practice. First, stillness. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Stillness means responding, rather than reacting. Choosing your actions from center, rather than from panic. When she doesn't text back, stillness waits without creating stories. When she's distant, stillness doesn't chase with anxious questions. It simply continues its work, its purpose, its life present and available, but not desperate and pursuing. The chaser repels. The still man invites approach. Second, boundaries. Give from a place of respect for yourself and for her, never from fear of loss. Seneca taught, no man is free who is a slave to his body. But we might add, no man is free who is a slave to another's approval. Set boundaries, not as walls, but as definitions of your integrity. Give what you can offer, without resentment. Say no when yes would diminish you. Love generously, but never at the cost of self-abandonment. When your giving comes from fear, fear shall leave fear. You're not enough. Fear of being alone. It carries the weight of obligation. But when you give from wholeness, from choice, rather than compulsion, your generosity becomes light, attractive, desirable. Third mystery. Space isn't absence. It's the oxygen that keeps desire alive. You don't need to fill every silence answer, every question. Be constantly available. Make yourself entirely known. Like the flame that requires oxygen to burn. Attraction needs space to breathe. Too much closeness, too much availability, too much transparency. And you've smothered the very thing you hoped to sustain. Let conversations end before you're fully satisfied. Leave some words unspoken. Maintain dimensions of yourself that remain unexplored, not through deception, but through natural reserve. Epictetus counseled, don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. This is the essence of detachment from results. Care without demanding specific outcomes. Love without requiring love returned in equal measure. Invest without making her response the determining factor of your worth. The practice is brutally simple, yet profoundly difficult. End one conversation this week before you're satisfied. When you feel the urge to say more, to explain further, to extend the interaction, stop. Leave space unfilled. Let silence do the work your words cannot. Trust that absence creates longing in ways presence never will. This isn't game playing. This isn't withholding to manipulate. This is the recognition that attraction dies in saturation and revives in space. When you're always available, always explaining, always pursuing, you've left no room for her to miss you, to wonder about you, to lean toward you of her own volition. Detach from results. Stay rooted in values. Care deeply, but let your peace remain undisturbed by how that care is received. Be present when you're together, complete when you're apart. This is the magnetic indifference that draws rather than repels the strength to love without grasping to care, without collapsing. 7. Letting go so she can feel you again. There comes a moment in every struggling connection when the most powerful action is no action at all, when the wisest words are the ones left unspoken, when the gesture that changes everything is the deliberate choice to step back, create space, and let silence do the work your desperate efforts could never accomplish. This isn't withdrawal as punishment. It's not the cold shoulder, not manipulation disguised as self-control. It's restoration, the necessary pause that allows distorted energy to recalibrate, that gives both of you room to remember who you were before anxiety consumed the space between you. Marcus Aurelius understood this principle deeply. Confine yourself to the present. Yet when we're caught in the grip of relational anxiety, we do the opposite. We project into the future, catastrophize about outcomes, and frantically attempt to control what cannot be controlled. We text, explain, pursue, prove an endless performance designed to secure what only silence can restore. Here's the truth that will set you free when you stop proving she starts feeling. All your efforts to demonstrate your value, to explain your worth, to convince her of your significance, they create noise that drowns out the very qualities that attracted her initially. She can't feel your presence when you're desperately broadcasting it. She can't sense your strength when you're anxiously displaying it. She can't remember why she was drawn to you when you're constantly reminding her. Silence creates the energetic reset that words cannot. It rebuilds what pursuit destroys: curiosity and respect. When you stop filling every gap, stop preemptively addressing every concern, stop making yourself constantly available, you create a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum. Her attention, which scattered when you chased, begins to gather when you're still. Her curiosity, which died under the weight of your need, reawakens in the space of your absence. Seneca observed, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable." Apply this to your retreat. Your silence isn't born from hurt or spite, but from unconquerable self-possession. You're not withdrawing to manipulate her response. You're withdrawing to restore your own center. This distinction matters because she'll feel the difference. Strategic silence reeks of calculation. Genuine composure emanates peace. Understand this indifference isn't cold, it's composed. It's not the icy rejection of someone who doesn't care. It's the warm groundedness of someone who cares, but isn't controlled by caring. It's the difference between a man who walks away in anger and a man who steps back in wisdom. One pushes, the other creates space for natural return. The less you prove, the more she perceives your worth. This paradox governs all attraction. Every explanation diminishes you. Every justification weakens your position. Every attempt to convince her of your value provides evidence against it. But the man who simply exists in his own integrity, who needs no audience for his worth, who remains unmoved by her fluctuating attention, he becomes interesting again, valuable again, worthy of her consideration again. Epictetus taught silence is safer than speech. In the chaos of relational turbulence, this wisdom becomes your anchor. When triggered, when she's distant, when you feel yourself slipping into panic, when every instinct screams to reach out, practice the art of sacred silence. Not for an hour, not until the anxiety passes. For 24 full hours. Watch what shifts, but observe yourself first, not her. Notice how the urgency diminishes, how perspective returns, how the stories you constructed lose their power in the absence of your attention. Notice how your peace doesn't actually depend on her response, how you're whole without her validation, how silence restores what words fractured your self-respect, your center, your gravity. He who masters silence commands gravity, not the gravity of manipulation or strategy, but the natural gravity of a man anchored in his own worth. When you stop orbiting around her approval and instead rotate around your own axis, something fundamental shifts. You become solid ground again, immovable, trustworthy, magnetic. Let go, not to get her back, but to get yourself back. The rest will unfold as it should. Sometimes she returns, curious about the man who stopped chasing. Sometimes she doesn't, and you discover you're fine either way. Both outcomes reveal the same truth. Your peace was never conditional on her participation. Silence speaks. Let it speak for you. From needing to leading. You didn't lose her because you cared. You lost her because you forgot yourself inside that care. And that's the lesson worth carrying forward. Love is strongest when it doesn't need to be returned, when it flows from fullness rather than emptiness, when it asks for nothing, yet offers everything. Be kind, but untamed, present, but free, grounded in values that don't shift with her attention or dissolve in her absence. Save this video. Return to it the next time you feel that familiar urgency to prove your worth, to chase reassurance, to collapse into someone else's validation. Let these principles remind you who you are when you've forgotten. Seneca left us with this final truth. A man's worth is measured by what he lets disturb him. The less you're shaken by external circumstances, by her distance, her silence, her fluctuating warmth, the more valuable you become, not just to her, but to yourself. If these ideas resonated, subscribe to Stoic Magnet. We're building a community of men reclaiming their quiet power through the art of magnetic indifference. More wisdom, more practices, more truth awaits in the videos ahead. Click that subscribe button. Your future self will thank you for it.